Hi, my name is Jeremy Davis, and I'm here part of Richmond Library's 100 Days RVA Reads. Today I'll be reading a selection from A Separate Piece by John Knowles. I chose this book because a lot of the action takes place at a private school between two rivers, and it's a symbolic, the rivers play a symbolic role in the books, and here in Richmond we have the James River, so it just seemed like an appropriate place to read it. There are two rivers at Devon, divided by a small dam. On my way, I stopped on the footbridge which crosses the top of the dam, separating them, and looked upstream, as a narrow little Devon river sliding towards me between its thick fringe of pine and birch. As I had to do whenever I glimpsed the river, I thought of Phineas, not of the tree in pain, but of one of his favorite tricks. Phineas, in exaltation, balancing on one foot on the prow of a canoe like a river god, his raised arms invoking the air to support him, face transfigured, a body a complex set of balances and compensations, each muscle aligned in perfection with all those others to maintain the supreme fantasy of achievement, his skin glowing from immersions, his whole body hanging between river and sky as though he had transcended gravity and might be gently pushed upward with his foot glide a little way higher and remain suspended in space, encompassing all the glory of the summer and offering it to the sky. Then an infinitesimal veering of the canoe and the line of his body would break, the soaring arms collapse, upshoot an uncontrollable leg, and Phineas would tumble into the water, roaring with rage. I stopped in the middle of this hurrying day to remember him like that. Then, feeling refreshed, went on to the crew house beside the Tidewater River below the dam. We never used this lower river, the Nagomset, during the summer. It was an ugly saline, fringed with marsh, mud, and seaweed. A few miles away it was joined to the ocean, so that its movements were governed by unimaginable factors like the Gulf Stream, the polar ice caps, and the moon. It was nothing like the freshwater Devon above the dam, where we had so much fun all summer. The Devon's course was determined by some familiar hills. A little inland, it rose high among the highland farms and forests which we knew, passed at the end of its course through the school grounds, and then threw itself with little spectacle over a waterfall beside the diving dam into the turbid Nagomset. The Devon school was astride these two rivers. At the crew house, Quackenbush, in the midst of some milling oarsmen in the damp main room, spotted me the instant I came in. With his dark, expressionless eyes, Quackenbush was the crew manager, and there was something wrong about him. I didn't know exactly what it was. In the throng of the winter terms at Devon, we were the opposite extremities of the class, and to me there only came the disliked edge of Quackenbush's reputation. A clue to it was his first name was never used. I didn't even know what it was. He had no nickname, not even an unfriendly one. "Late, Forrester," he said, in his already matured voice. He was a firmly masculine type. Perhaps he was disliked only because he had matured before the rest of us. "Yes, sorry, I got held up." "The crew waits for no man." He didn't seem to think this was a funny thing to say. I did, and I had to chuckle. "Well, if you think it's all a joke." I didn't say it was a joke. "I've got to have some real help around here. The crew is going to win the New England Scholastics, or my name isn't Cliff Quackenbush." With that blank filled, I took up my duties as assistant senior crew manager. There is no position officially, but it sometimes came into existence through necessity. It was all work and no advantages. The official assistant to the crew manager was a member of the class below, and the following year he could come into senior management with all of its rights and status. An assistant who was already senior ranked nowhere. Since I had applied for such a non-entity of a job, Quackenbush, who had known little about me, and I had about him, knew now. "Get some towels," he said, looking at me, pointing at the door. "How many?" "Who knows? Get some, as many as you can carry. That won't be too many." Jobs like mine were usually taken by boys with some sort of physical disability, since everyone had to take part in sports and this was all the disabled boys could do. As I walked towards the door, I suppose Quackenbush was studying me to see if he could detect a limp, but I knew that his flat black eyes would never detect my trouble. Quackenbush felt mellower by the end of the afternoon as we stood on the float in front of the crew house, gathering up towels. "You never rowed, did you?" He opened this conversation like that, without pause or question mark. His voice sounded almost too mature, as though he was putting it on a little. He sounded as though he was speaking through a tube. "No, I never did. I rowed on the lightweight crew for 2 years." He had a tough bantam body, easily detectable under the tight sweatshirt he wore. "I wrestle in the winter," he went on. "What are you doing in the winter?" "I don't know. Manage something else?" "You're a senior, aren't you?" He knew that I was a senior. "Yeah." "Starting a little late to manage teams, aren't you?" "Am I?" "Damn right you are." his indignant conviction into this, pouncing on the first sprig of assertiveness in me. Well, it doesn't matter. Yes, it does. I don't think it does. Go to hell, Forrester. Who the hell are you anyway? I turned with an inward groan to look at him. Quackenbush wasn't going to let me just do the work for him like the automaton that I wished to be. We were going to have to be pitted against each other. It was easy enough now to see why, for Quackenbush had been systematically disliked since he first set foot in Devon, with careless, disinterested insults coming at him from the beginning, voting for and applauding the class leaders through years of attaining nothing he wanted for himself. I didn't want to add to his humiliations. I even sympathized with his trembling, goaded egotism that he could no longer contain. The furious arrogance which sprang out now at the mere hint of opposition from someone he had at last found who he could consider inferior to himself. I realized that all of this explained him, that it wasn't the words he said which angered me, it was only that he was so ignorant, that he knew nothing of the gypsy summer, nothing of the loss I was fighting to endure, of the skylarks and splashes and petal-blazing breezes. He had not seen leper's snails or the charter of the super suicide society. He shared nothing, knew nothing, felt nothing, as Phineas had done. You, Quackenbush, don't know anything about who I am. That launched me, and I had to go on and say, or anything else. Listen, you maimed son of a bitch. I hit him hard across the face. I don't know why, for an instant. It was almost as if though I was maimed. Then the realization that there was someone who was flashed over me. Quackenbush had clamped his arm in some sort of tight wrestling grip around my neck, and I was glad in this moment not to be crippled. I reached over and grasped the back of his sweatshirt, wrenched, and it came away in my hand. I tried to throw him off, and he lunged at the same time. We catapulted into the water. The dousing extinguished Quackenbush's rage, and he let go of me. I scrambled back onto the float, still seared by what he had said. The next time you call someone maimed, I bit off the words harshly so he would understand all of them. You better make sure they are first. Get out of here, Forrester, he said bitterly from the water. You're not wanted here. Forrester, get out of here. I fought the battle, that first skirmish of a long campaign for Finney, until the back of my hand cracked against Quackenbush's face. I had never pictured myself in the role of Finney's defender, and I didn't suppose that he would have thanked me for it now. He was too loyal to anything connected with himself, his roommate, his dormitory, his class, his school, outward in a vastly expanded circle of loyalty until I couldn't imagine who would be excluded. But it didn't feel as though exactly I had done it for Phineas. I felt as though I had done it for myself. If you like what you heard here today, please visit us at rbalibrary.org/100 days. This is day 26. It was part of the PBS WCVE Great American Read. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Sarah, and I was the one who shared the 100 days of RVA books, with Jeremy, because I know how much of a bibliophile he is, and I thought it just sounded like a really creative way to expose people to different books that they may not have read or considered before. And it's been a lot of fun so far watching all of the videos of all of the different readers with their different selections and their interpretations and the reasons for their selections. I think is really interesting too. And Jeremy was one of the first to sign up because I had a feeling that he would be really excited about doing this. Of course he was, and I had a really fun time watching him.
Yeah, it's kind of neat. I mean, reading was always kind of a singular event, you know. It was just you reading a book. This book, separate piece, we had to read it in high school, and my English teacher, Susan Dietz, was the first one that really discussed a book and a meaning of a book with me, and it became more of an exchanging of ideas as opposed to just a singular, you read a book and you process it. And so that's kind of another reason why this book, you know, stood out to me.
Yeah. And you did a great job.